Hello and welcome to the program. I am DEJI360 EPP. Oil prices are currently slightly above $90 per barrel. Now, there's even forecast that the price might go up to as high as $100 per barrel this year. Now, that should be good news for Nigeria because it literally means we would earn more from the sale of crude, and it should also help reduce the pressure on the local currency, the naira, since the country would earn more foreign exchange. But the World Bank has said all of that gain could be eroded because of the huge amount of money Nigeria spends on subsidizing the cost of petrol in the country. And truth is that you can hardly fault the World Bank on this. The Nigerian government, of course, wants to scrap the subsidy, but it's been finding it extremely difficult to do so. The current government had planned to completely end the subsidy regime by June this year, but it's now been forced to back down after labor unions in the country threatened a nationwide protest. The government has now retained the subsidy for another 18 months. Minister of State for Petroleum Resources, Timipre Silva, who announced the decision, explained that the extension will give all stakeholders time to ensure that the implementation is carried out in a manner that ensures all necessary modalities are in place to cushion the effect of the removal in line with prevailing economic realities. Let's quickly take a listen to some of what the minister said.
Because Mr. President is a very human president and is concerned for the plight of our people, especially the less privileged, he believes that the impact that removal of subsidy will have on the vulnerable, poor and vulnerable Nigerians should be mitigated. And he believes that certain structures must be put in place prior to the removal of subsidy. All those structures are not right now in place. One of those is to ensure that the refineries are working, and you are all aware that steps are being taken for all refineries to be functional very soon. The Dangote refinery is expected to come on stream at the end of this year. All our refineries, the Port Harcourt refinery, is expected to be performing at a certain capacity, not full capacity, by end of this year. There are some modular refineries that are also going to come on stream later this year. Also, there is discussion of introducing an alternate fuel for cars in the form of autogas. And somebody asked what has happened since launching. A lot has gone on there.
Manwa, with the new decision, the Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning, Zainab Ahmed, has announced that about 3 trillion naira would be required to continue paying for subsidy. To put it in perspective, that is about 17% of the 2022 budget and over 60% of the capital expenditure profile now in that budget, which is about 4.89 trillion naira. Zainab, however, added that the government is currently looking at ways of scaling down the amount because they obviously cannot afford that much. Let's take a listen now to some of what the minister said.
In 2021, the actual under recovery that has been that has been charged to the Federation was 1.2 trillion, which means an average of 100 billion per month. But in 2022, because of the increased prices of crude oil price per barrel in the global market, now at $80 per barrel, and also because NMPC's assessment is that the country is consuming 65.7 million liters per day, that will end up with incremental cost of 3 trillion in 2022. So this has been considered by Council, and we've also been asked to approach the National Assembly for an amendment to the fiscal framework as well as the budget. We're going to engage NMPC to further interrogate the request that they presented with a view of trying to see how we can scale it down so that the country is not incurring 3 trillion for subsidy. We agree with the view of the governors that there's a need to scale down on the side. So even as government is not immediately removing the fuel subsidy, we have to make sure that what the nation is incurring is efficient and that it is real cost that has been consumed by the country. The other lady asked a question: how do we fund this? So we hope to reconcile to reduce the cost, but also we have several reconciliations with NNPC, and NNPC itself is owing in some cases government. So we want to be able to settle some of the subsidy costs through this reconciliation process. So when we're done with that, whatever is left that we're not able to apply to what NNPC is owing the Federation will now be increasing the deficit, and that means increased domestic borrowing.
Well, that's the Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning, Zainab Ahmed there. Now, from my understanding of the last part of her speech there, Nigeria may even have to borrow if necessary to fund subsidy payment. Let's dissect this some more now. I'm being joined on the program by Johnson Chukwu, who is an economist as well as the Managing Director of Cowrie Asset Management Limited, an investment bank based in Lagos. Mr. Chukwu, thank you very much for joining us on the program. I mean, I remember some time ago, probably the beginning of 2020 or sometime in 2020, we had a discussion on this subsidy, and as at that time, the price of crude was somewhere around $28 per barrel. And you did say at that time that it was the best time for the government to remove subsidy. The government did not do it, and now we're here.
Yes, first of all, thank you for having me, Deji. The fact is that we have been postponing the evils there. There's never going to be a perfect time to remove subsidy. As it stands today, we have actually allowed a bad situation to get worse. And I'll tell you why I said we have allowed a bad situation to get worse. Previous periods, we were earning enough revenue, foreign exchange from crude oil sales as to cover for the importation of petroleum products. As it stands today, we are not even earning enough from crude oil sales to cover for fuel importation in the country today. If you look at the budget performance last year, the minister reeled out when she gave the budget broadcast for 2022. She said earnings from crude oil sales, the federal government share was just about, I think, about 970 or 930 billion. Exactly. Okay. Now, she also said that we spent 1.2 trillion naira to subsidize petroleum product last year. So if by November, we had only earned about 930 or 970 billion from crude oil at the federal level, then it then follows that we couldn't have, the federal government couldn't have received, federal government share alone could have been up to 1.2 trillion naira at the end of last year.
And the question is, so why are we even in this oil business in the first place?
You see, unfortunately for us, we are facing a very unusual situation. Crude oil production in the country has declined precipitously. Last year, average crude oil production was just about 1.31 million barrels a day. I think in December, the crude oil production was just about 1.396 million barrels, when our OPEC quota was about 1.69, almost 1.7 million barrels a day. So in effect, we are producing less than 300,000 to our OPEC quota. But then we've seen an escalating consumption of refined petroleum products. If you remember, some 4 or 5 years ago, the argument was that we couldn't be consuming about 35 million liters a day. Today, we're talking of 67 million liters a day. And of course, we and I know that consumption can't be fully ascribed to Nigerians alone, because what we're doing, we are now subsidizing consumption across all the countries that are contiguous to Nigeria. Call it Niger Republic, call it Chad, call it Cameroon, Benin Republic, even as far as Togo. Nigeria is subsidizing fuel consumption in those locations. And that's why our consumption is about 67 million, because 67 million barrels a day. Because if you look at the price differential between the pump price in Nigeria and the pump price in neighboring countries, their pump price is about 3 times what we pay. So smugglers can pay any price to cross product from Nigeria to those countries. Take for instance when the minister said we're going to spend about 3 trillion naira to subsidize petroleum products. Last year, by November, total federal government revenue was 5.5 trillion naira. So if you look at that, and you project what the federal government would have earned at the end of last year, maybe would have earned about 6 trillion naira at the federal level. So 50% of it will be used to subsidize petroleum products in the current year. Assuming we maintain the same level of revenue and the same that we enjoyed last year. In this year, we have projected 17.1 trillion naira as government expenditure. If you add another 2.5 trillion naira, because what the government said in that projection, they had about 445 billion. If you add another 2.5 trillion, we'll be spending about 20 trillion naira this year. And if we earn 6 trillion this year, it then means that the government will borrow 14 trillion naira.
And obviously, from what the minister said, the last part of her speech there, she made it very clear that, look, Nigeria may have to borrow to pay for subsidy.
Yeah, I think she was just being frank, because what are the options? You are not going to pay it with your bare hands. And even when she talked of reconciliation, when we talk of reconciliation is this: NNPC is basically the treasury of the government. So if you are talking about reconciliation, whatever reconciliation you are doing is still money that should have come to the government. So it doesn't change anything. The fact of the matter is that this nation will cough out about 3 trillion naira to subsidize petroleum products. Let me ask you, you made reference to the capital expenditure projection for this year. And I can tell you that if we invest 3 trillion naira in critical infrastructure in the country, the impact will be so huge that we will begin to narrow the infrastructural gap we have in this country. How much are we spending to do the Lagos-Ibadan Express Road? How much are we spending to do any of the major roads, including the roads that they've been borrowing money from Sukuk to do? If, unfortunately, and I've said this, I want to repeat it, if we continue this route, we are going to certainly bankrupt this country in the not too distant future. There's no way the country can afford to borrow 14 trillion naira in the fiscal year just to fund subsidy and fund recurrent expenditure and fund debt service. Most of the expenditure government is securing now are basically to just pay debt service, pay subsidy, and pay the overhead of civil servants. We are not so much investing in infrastructure, and we're borrowing to invest in recurrent expenditure without investing in infrastructure. What happens then when you do that? You are not building the capacity to increase the revenue of the government. And that means the burden of paying those debts or paying interest on those debts will increase, intensify, as to the point you get a point where it becomes difficult for government to pay its obligations as it relates to interest and principal repayment, because its revenue will be swallowed up.
So what do you make of this 18-month extension that the government is talking about? I mean, the Minister of Petroleum Resources said, well, that within that period, our refineries, well, not at least working to some capacity, he said, at the end of the year. And the expectation is that the Dangote refinery too would have kicked in, and that the auto gas initiative too would have been well grounded and all of that. But would all of this still bring an end to subsidy, so to speak? If all of these things are in place, if all of these things were in place, for instance, are we absolutely sure that when you have all of this in place, there will be no need for subsidy anymore?
Well, in the first place, I will remind you that these programs have been on for so long. Improving on the production of the refineries have been on for God knows how long, since I was a young boy. And in all instances where the issue of taking out the subsidy came up, labor union or the government had both of the parties have always said that, look, let's fix the refinery before we remove the subsidy. But we've not been able to fix it for the past 20 years. So what gives you the confidence we'll not fix it in the next 18 months? If you recall, when Ibe Kachuku was made the Minister of Petroleum, he gave a timeline and said, look, if he didn't fix those refineries within the timeline, that he will scrap them or sell them. That is more than almost 4 years ago that commitment was made, and the refineries were not fixed. So, and then we're talking about the same thing again. And then let me also remind us when we talk about Dangote refinery. Remember, Dangote refinery is in an export-free trade zone. Again, Dangote refinery will buy crude with foreign currency. The crude oil is not sold anywhere in Naira, unless the federal government decides to subsidize crude.
Well, the central bank governor did say something some time ago that there's a possibility that the crude will be sold to Dangote in Naira. I don't know about that anyway, but that's what...
Well,
That's
Well,
what the central bank governor says he expects to happen.
I'll be shocked at how that will happen. You see, the truth is that if they do that, it simply means that federal government is paying the oil majors the dollar value of the crude price and not naira. Oil is produced under joint venture arrangement between Nigeria, NNPC, or federal government, as recommended by NNPC, and oil majors like Shell, Chevron, Total. So, and the product is sold in dollars. So, if the central bank wants to sell crude to Dangote in naira, central bank will pay dollar to the oil producers and then collect naira from Dangote. It still boils down to the same thing. It simply means we just did a swapping, and at the end of the day, dollar leaves the reserve. So let's not dwell on that. But the fact is that Dangote head of tail will pay for crude in dollar. It's either he's buying from local crude producers or buying from international market. The problem we're having now is that even local crude producers are not producing enough. So Dangote may be forced to buy crude from the international market. So the central bank also pay the international suppliers in naira. Remember I mentioned earlier that we're currently producing about 1.3 million barrels a day. So Dangote refinery is 650,000 barrels a day capacity. So Dangote refinery will take 50% of crude production from the country. And those who produce the crude, some of them have already commitments to supply crude to off-takers. So, but back to what we're saying, I do not think some of these things, excuses that we're giving now, will change in the next 18 months. Neither will you fix the local refineries, nor will you retrofit enough vehicles locally as to ensure that demand for crude for refined petroleum product declines. Or are you going to ring-fence all the borders so that you no longer smuggle crude refined petroleum product to neighboring countries? You're not going to do any of those things in the 18 months. I think what the government is doing, they're buying time and saying, look, we can't take this politically sensitive decision now. Let the next government deal with it. And as far as I'm concerned, anything to the contrary, for me, does not represent fact. I had actually expected that it would be a difficult call for any government to take a subsidy in a pre-election year. I actually expected that they would have started that year, started price modulation, and then prices would have moved up to the extent that Nigerians would have gotten adjusted to a higher price for refined petroleum products. You cannot really wake up one day and tell us on the 1st of July that petrol price will move from 165 naira to 400 naira. It would have been impossible for the population to take it, consumers to take it. They should have started this process last year. But what we have done is to postpone the evil's day. It is a necessary evil, a necessary pain in this economy. We as Nigerians must be ready to take to begin to restructure this economy for the necessary growth we all desire.
I just hope when that evil day comes again, that we'll be able to bite the bullet, because, you know, we've had that evil day come several times, and when it comes, we just chicken out. And, well, 18 months is just around the corner, but I still feel, and unfortunately, the price of crude is going up, and as it continues to go up, it means the subsidy figure will definitely go up, probably more than the 3 trillion naira that the minister talked about there, right?
Yes, most likely. And which is I say, look, you have a situation where you are producing fewer volumes of lesser crude, and then your consumption of refined petroleum products is increasing. And the cost of even importing what you are consuming is increasing, well, as you're not producing enough to take advantage of the increase in crude price. So for me, it's a double whammy for the country. And common economics logic will tell us what. If we take our subsidy one, the consumption will decline from 67 million barrels a day to maybe 30 million barrels or thereabouts. Two things will happen. Nigerians will be more conservative in the way they burn fuel in their vehicles. Remember that many of the public transport vehicles are already using diesel. They are buying products, they're buying diesel at market prices. Yes, many of the transport companies, many of the haulage companies that we refer when we say, look, those who are bringing food items from the north will pay more. They are all on diesel. So the people who are using fuel are those who are using the forerunners, the cars. So if you have a higher level of a higher price for fuel, they will cut down on their movement. They will cut down on their consumption, and then we will eliminate the quantity of volume that is smuggled out of the country. By the time you do both, you may realize that the consumption will drop drastically to maybe half of what we're currently stating we're consuming. That will help us conserve foreign exchange and ensure that we balance our books as a country.
Mr. Johnson Chukwu, thank you very, very much for your time, and thank you for this frank discussion on this very controversial issue. Thank you so much, sir.
My pleasure.
All right, we'll take a short break and we'll be right back. Stay with us.
Opinions are free, facts are sacred, but truth is universal.
How, in practical terms, can we, for instance, de-escalate the tension?
President must see himself as the President of the Federal Republic.
We know where the enemy is. 3 places. The Lake Chad Basin, the border area between Nigeria and Cameroon, and then the Sambisa Forest.
On DEJI360, we give you a complete dose of everything. Opinion, facts, and undiluted truth.
I hardly believe what politicians say in this part of the world.
A new Nigeria is possible, a future is possible.